small businesses, especially those in communities of color, were largely shut out of the government's Paycheck Protection Program, or PPP as it's known. Well, enter billionaire businessman and philanthropist Robert F. Smith, who is taking steps to make sure that minority-owned businesses get their fair share of funds in Phase 2 of the PPP program. And Robert F. Smith joins me this morning. Mr. Smith, thank you for coming on. Let me just start with this observation and get your big picture take. When you look at what this pandemic has done, is in some ways it's been an MRI on inequality, whether it's on health outcomes for communities of color, or now we're seeing the economic impact. It's communities of color that are getting hit first. Knowing that going forward, what does our rescue plan need to look like as far as you're concerned?
Sure. And Chuck, thank you for having me on the program this morning. As a good friend of mine has said, this is a pandemic on top of a series of epidemics. And I think the important thing that we have to do is continue to rally as Americans to come with real, lasting, scalable solutions to enable the communities that are getting hit first, hardest, and probably will take the longest to recover with solutions that will enable their communities to thrive again. We were coming into a period of time, quite frankly, in America where we were actually getting some economic activity back in these communities. So I'm thinking and working with a number of folks in Washington, with community leaders, with fintech companies, including one that we own, to enable these banks to really drive some economic opportunity back into these communities.
What do you think, frankly, that Washington failed to understand about how small businesses, particularly in communities of color, what do they fail to understand about their banking relationships where this money just didn't get to them?
Well, what's interesting, I wouldn't necessarily say it's a failure to understand. In fact, we just had an erosion of what I term as a capillary banking system in America. Many of these small communities, urban, rural, aren't being banked by the larger institutions. And what actually gets to these small businesses are these community development financial institutions, the minority development institutions, depository institutions. We call them CDFIs and MDIs. And these are the capillary banking systems that actually get to these customers, these small businesses, and they didn't have access going into this program, the PPP program, to the SBA in many cases. But I will say that through, frankly, leadership in Washington, we've had people like Ivanka Trump and Senator Mnuchin, who've been very engaged in this process with me and a number of community leaders to build out and rebuild and fortify some of the infrastructure for these CDFIs and MDIs. So they now, in this second wave, have had access to the PPP funding. And hopefully, if we get this right, which we are all determined to, we will leave permanent infrastructure for these institutions now have the capacity to drive regenerative capital back into those communities.
Go even bigger picture for me. In the rescue plan that Congress put out there the first time, that it's essentially put $6 trillion in play, $4 trillion in the credit markets with the Fed, $2 trillion in actual cash, and yet now it looks like they underestimated the total calamity here. Do you see the next round being more like the first, or do you think it needs to be reimagined?
I think it needs to be reimagined. We have to take this opportunity to reinvest in our business infrastructure, in these small to medium businesses, in our banking infrastructure, and what I call these capillary banking systems, so that we can actually emerge out of this even stronger. We have to invest. I'm in the world of software, as you know. We have to invest in technology and software so that the banking systems these capillary banking systems are more efficient. They have more access to capital. They have more transparency. They actually then can engage with these businesses that are in the communities that are frankly underbanked, and in many cases not banked at all. 94% of African-American businesses, for instance, are sole proprietorships. 70% are underbanked, or there are no banks. We have banking deserts in these communities. And so we would be remiss if we didn't take a significant portion of capital to reinvest in the infrastructure, delivering capital back into those businesses, and frankly, reinvest in those businesses and give them technology and capabilities so there's more transparency, visibility, and giving their businesses an opportunity to grow, scale, and operate more efficiently. So it is our opportunity, even though we're in a challenging time, and my heart goes out to many families who've lost people. And fact of the matter is, our first responders, a lot of them are coming from our communities. We have to reinvest so that when we come out of the back end of this pandemic, we're actually in a much better position. I don't want to see us going back to the same position where we were, where we had these underbanked and these banking deserts in these communities.